things get worse in the next 2 weeks. We're leaving in 2 weeks.
We're just going to pretend that things aren't going to
Yeah. Did you have trouble coming back? No, you were in the Keys.
No,
You were in the U.S. Yeah.
I drove,
Oh, you drove? That's a long drive.
but it was worth every minute.
Good.
Yeah, we decided to drive. You know, the whole having 4 kids thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been reading about, they keep changing, they keep relaxing, but then confusing us on the way in, and then coming back, it's still, essentially, the U.S. is out of sync with the rest of
Yeah.
Western civilization, but hopefully, we're all prepared.
Yeah, actually, I was supposed to go to DC and everything keeps changing.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the May 9th, 2022 Apex Planning Board. I'm gonna do the invocation, so I'll ask you all to bow your heads. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to come together with the staff of the town of Apex and this planning board to represent the citizens. Give us the guidance to make decisions that are best for this town. And we ask these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
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 Please stand and face the flag for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amanda, I believe we have some items of information today.
Yes, one quick item. We'd like to introduce our new planning technician to the planning board. Josh, if you can stand. This is Joshua Killian, and he began work as our new planning technician on March 28th. He received his BA in political science from ECU in 2019, and will soon be receiving his Master of Public Administration from Regent University. Josh was a 2022 participant in the ECU Leadership Development Academy, served as the chair for the Harriet College Council on Anti-Racism and Equity, and is the recipient of ECU's 2022 Chancellor's Horizon Awards for service for diversity and inclusion for his staff work as a student service specialist in ECU's Department of Chemistry. In his spare time, Joshua enjoys attending ECU athletic events, traveling, and using creativity to connect with others. So, welcome to
Welcome.
Josh.
Welcome, Josh. You're the pirate.
That's all I have.
Pirate in the house.
All right, so public comment is allowed for public items to discuss the agenda under the public hearings. Any member of the public wishing to comment on public hearing items will be called at the appropriate time later in the agenda. If you haven't done so already, please sign in over here to my right, your left, for the public comment section. The period is an opportunity for the public to express concerns or opinions, but is not intended to be a question and answer session. During public comment, the public may comment on any non-public hearing item, including new business items that appear in this agenda. Comments from the public on new business items will not be taken later in the agenda, so if you wish to speak on a new business item, public comment is the time to do so. All comments must be limited to 3 minutes. When 3 minutes are up, I will say thank you. You wrap up your comments. If there are a large number of speakers for one particular item, I ask that you please have a representative to speak on behalf of the entire group, and the comments to be limited to 9 minutes. If not, comments on a single topic should not be repetitive in nature. If comments were already made by another speaker, please state agreement with that prior speaker and do not repeat the already stated comments. We will now move on to item number 1, which is the consent for the minutes from April 11th, 2022. I take it you've all reviewed those minutes. Any comments, corrections, or possible motions?
Motion to approve.
All right. I have a motion from Keith
I will second it.
and a second. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. All right. First item of business. Lauren, you're going to talk to us about our potential rezoning case 21CZ31, the Sears property PUD.
Mhm.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This is rezoning case 21CZ31, Sears property PUD, located at 0 and 2108 Old US 1 Highway. The properties are located in this general area in our ETJ, north of our Old US 1 Highway, and situated between Holland Road and Winding Creek Road, as I mentioned, north of Old US 1 Highway. The properties are currently zoned rural residential, and the adjacent zonings are all rural residential. The properties are proposing to rezone to plan unit development conditional zoning. The 2045 land use map designates the subject properties as medium density residential office employment, as you can see, half medium density and half office employment. The proposed rezoning to plan unit development conditional zoning includes a mix of residential uses and commercial uses and is consistent with those land use map designations. The site consists of 2 parcels, approximately 26.218 acres. The property located at 0 Old US 1 Highway is vacant and has existing vegetation and is bisected from with the stream. And 2108 Old US 1 Highway has residential structures. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on November 19th, 2021. The neighborhood meeting report is attached. A full list of the proposed uses is on page 2 of the staff report. The proposed residential uses include townhouse, accessory apartment, utility minor, recreation facility private, greenway, park active, and park passive. A few proposed non-residential uses include daycare facility, microbrewery, medical or dental, office or clinic, and office, business, or professional. The residential component is proposing a maximum of 160 townhouse units with a maximum density of 6.1 units per acre. The non-residential component is proposing a maximum of 11,000 square feet. A full list of the proposed residential and non-residential setbacks are on page 3 of the staff report, as well as a full list of the zoning conditions that can be found on page 4 of the staff report. A few I'd like to point out are zoning condition C, no covenant shall be placed on the property which prohibits accessory apartment as a use. Zoning condition D, outdoor storage shall not be permitted for non-residential uses. And zoning condition Q, which is the affordable housing condition. It's a little long, so I'll try my best to summarize. The affordable housing condition includes 5 price restricted units at the 100% median income affordability range for an affordability period of 10 years. This has been worked out between the applicant and our housing program manager. The RCA shall meet the requirements in the UDO. The proposed buffers include a 20-foot type B buffer along the northern property boundary with a 30-foot type E along Old US 1 Highway, and along the eastern and western side will be a 20-foot type B buffer. The town of Apex will provide water, sanitary sewer, and electric services to this project. A full list of the architectural conditions can be found on page 5 of the staff report. The residential and non-residential conditions are what we generally see for townhouses and non-residential. The maximum building height proposed for residential is 36 feet, no more than 2 stories. The maximum building height proposed for non-residential is 60 feet. A TIA has been performed as part of this PUD, and I'll summarize a few of the road improvements. However, the full TIA requirements can be found on page 8 of the staff report, and Mr. Russell Dalton is here to provide clarification as needed. Along Old US 1 Highway, And the road improvement shall include 11 feet travel lanes, 6-foot bike lanes on 110-foot right-of-way, planned for eventual widening to a 4-lane median divided section. 5-foot sidewalks shall be provided along the development frontage, so along this part of the frontage. A maximum of 2 access points shall be proposed, a full movement access and a right-in, right-out. Requested by NCDOT, if sufficient right-of-way is available, developers shall construct an exclusive westbound right turn lane on Old US 1, per the NCDOT guidance. A letter of impact from Wake County Public School System was received for this rezoning and is included in the staff report packet. Wake County Public School Systems indicates that elementary, middle, and high schools within the current assignment area for this rezoning development are anticipated to have insufficient capacity for future students. Transportation to schools outside of the current assignment area shall be anticipated. School expansion or construction within the next 5 years may address concerns at the elementary and high school grade level. The Environmental Advisory Board held a meeting with the applicant on November 18th, 2021. The zoning conditions suggested by the EAB are listed on page 10 of the staff report, along with the applicant's response to each condition. Sears Property PUD was reviewed at the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Advisory Commission at the February 23rd, 2022 meeting. The commission unanimously recommended a fee in lieu of dedication for a maximum of 160 single-family attached units. Land dedication was not recommended as this property is located in a very near proximity to the Apex Nature Park, the future Pleasant Park, and Olive Farm Park. The current 2022 fee rate per unit is $2,528.25. The 2045 land use map designates the site as medium-density residential office employment. The proposed PUD is consistent with that land use classification. The proposed rezoning includes a mix of residential uses and commercial uses. Approval of the rezoning is reasonable and in the public interest because it will provide a transition between lower and higher residential densities while providing non-residential development opportunities along Old US 1 Highway. The proposed rezoning provides additional environmental conditions and provides an affordable housing option consistent with that affordable housing plan. Planning staff recommends approval of rezoning 21CZ31 Sears Property PUD with conditions as proposed by the applicant. I'm here to answer questions as well as the applicant and as well as Mr. Russell Dalton.
Questions for Laura? The applicant want to say anything?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group. Excited to be here on behalf of Beazer Homes. This is the proposed developer of this site. Joining me today is Matt Christensen with Beazer. You'll be hearing from him during the public speaks out portion of this project, but he's also here to answer any questions that you may have. Additionally, Nate Boquin with Ramey Kemp and Associates. They're the folks who did the traffic study on this. They're here to answer any questions that you may have related to traffic that will definitely be above my pay grade. The staff report, as well as Lauren's presentation, are pretty comprehensive in terms of the nuts and bolts associated with what this request is. I did want to highlight some things, as also provide a little bit of perspective associated with the nature of the request and what makes this development a little bit different than the ones that you've seen in other cases, certainly recently. It is, 160 townhomes and 11,000 square feet, planned for a development located on Old Highway 1 that's planned for medium-density residential and office and employment-generating uses. And we agree with the staff's perspective that what is proposed is indeed consistent with the land use plan. A couple of things I wanted to point out, and it really relates to kind of use and where those locations are, access to the site, and then buffers and affordable housing. And so from a use perspective, again, we are consistent with the land use plan by having the non-residential uses up along the highway and then transitioning to residential uses. As was shown in the land use plan discussion and presentation slide, this property isn't unique in this area as it relates to the town's long-term plans with respect to how this entire area should develop. I mean, basically everything around it is planned in a similar fashion. There's a lot of medium density residential plan in this area. There's some non-residential up along Highway 1. And so while we might be kind of the first to the table in terms of having properties change over from the typical county large lot classification into a town of Apex more, a municipal style development, we certainly won't be the last. And that, we understand that there are concerns from folks in the community who live adjacent to this site related to this development. At some point, and you've seen it before, they're going to be the property owners on a zoning case that looks just like this, asking for the same thing that was done as part of this case. And so I want to reiterate that point because, again, part of what we do in zoning cases is make sure that we are reasonable with respect to the use of land, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that the town spends a lot of time working on a land use plan and telling the community, telling property owners, this is what you should expect. And what we are doing is squarely consistent with the plans that have been adopted by the town. Second, with respect to buffers, I know there have been questions related to buffers and a request to increase those buffers. I want to make clear we are meeting the ordinance requirements. As you all are aware, the plan unit development actually gives you the flexibility to decrease buffers as part of a zoning case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but we haven't made that request. We are meeting the UDO requirements for buffering for a site like this. And that's important because those UDO requirements have different classes of use. And so the UDO has already baked in this idea that you're going to have a townhome use at this density, and you're going to have it adjacent to large lot single family, and it has created a system in place, and it contemplates this scenario. So the fact that we're meeting the UDO is significant, not because this is what the UDO requires, but because the UDO has a built-in expectation that this is what is appropriate when uses come along like this. And I do think that's important because it also relates to housing affordability. As you folks are aware, the town has spent a tremendous amount of time talking about how to achieve housing affordability. And I've said before to this board as well as to the town council, the town is really taking, in my opinion, the most sophisticated approach in the marketplace in terms of how to achieve housing affordability across all cross sections of folks who are coming to the area. One of the things we could have done, and the 5 affordable units at 100% AMI, from a raw number standpoint, that's the largest number of units that I've been involved in a case with. I don't know if there are others that have had more than 5 units, but 5 is meaningful. It's certainly meaningful to the 5 families that will live in those homes that otherwise wouldn't have a place to live in the town at that 100% AMI. We could have sought to reduce those buffers and used the housing affordability as a justification for doing so. As you're aware, as the town has begun the process of studying and trying to figure out what does a formal policy of our affordable housing program look like, one of the things that's being talked about as an incentive is, okay, if you're willing to bake in affordable units, maybe you consider reducing buffers. That's something we haven't asked to do here. And I do think that's an important point. Again, dovetailing with that point of the UDO already contemplates it, but we didn't ask for any special treatment. We said we're going to do those 5 units and we're going to follow the ordinance because we felt like that was the right thing to do in recognizing how this fits and will ultimately fit within the next 30 years of this area developing. We believe that what we've come up with is the right balance and will create a seamless development when this entire area ultimately develops. As it relates to price point, and Matt is certainly more capable, Matt Christensen with Beazer is certainly more capable of answering questions if you've got it. I think it's important to note, and you saw it, and it probably wasn't clear. So these are the elevations associated with the townhomes. One of the things you don't see is, first of all, it's not 3 stories, it's 2 stories. So it is a more traditional townhouse. But also one of the things you don't see is a garage. There are no garage. And that's actually a conscious decision that Beazer has made, and you can ask Matt about that further. But by eliminating the garage, because as you all have probably experienced, the garage on a single garage in a townhome unit ends up becoming a default storage unit. So by being able to make that living space and not have a garage, we still have to park per the ordinance standards so that there's no concern associated with parking. But by converting that to living space, you can actually take the overall cost of the units down. You can remove kind of that artificially inflated portion of the home and let folks, it drives the price of the unit down because you've got more living space. You don't have to add it on artificially. That's an important point because beyond the 5 units that are being offered in this case, Beazer views these as entry-level homes. You know, a lot of what you all have seen from a townhome standpoint, from a single-family detached standpoint, is not entry-level. Beazer's goal with respect to this entire development, beyond the five-unit commitment that's been made, their view is this is designed to fill a gap that currently exists in the town today, and that is for a more entry-level product. So I just want you to aware that from an overall intent standpoint, there was a conscious decision made during the planning process that Beazer has done in other places to try to fill a void kind of naturally, in addition to the condition that exists related to the affordable housing. Related to school capacity, as you've seen in other cases, you know, our case isn't unique in the sense that right now there aren't plans in place actively to be able to address those, but we've seen in other cases, we've learned in other cases that there are plans in the works to address the elementary side of the equation as well as the high school side of the equation. And the town continues to work with Wake County Public Schools and has approved zoning cases that have the same kind of letter from Wake County Public Schools that, you know, that look just like this. And so it feels to me like there's a plan in place, and that, you know, there are solutions being brought to the table that will ultimately address these concerns. And Matt can answer questions on this point as well, but this style of townhome, which is smaller footprint from an overall square footage standpoint, and at the entry level point that you're looking at, on a, you know, kind of a per unit standpoint, they just don't see as many school age children as you would in a typical townhome that's in the 2,000 square foot ballpark. So with that, you know, I'm here to answer any questions that you all may have. Would respectfully request you all's support of the case as we move forward. Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, before you step away, I just, I want to ask your in preparing to present before the board, to be a little more humble and cautious. There were a lot of assertions about the neighbors who have not had an opportunity to speak yet. I'm very interested in hearing from them. They've obviously attended the neighborhood meeting. Making assumptions about how they feel and what they're doing is not what this board needs you to do. Following the ordinance is actually what is required for you to do, and so for you to assert that you're following the ordinance is out of the ordinary is disingenuous. So
I mean,
please,
I'll take exception with that.
Excuse me, I'm not done. Please refrain from doing that in the future. Yes, you can ask to go outside the ordinance, but it is the law of the town, and it is unlikely if you ask that would be both approved at this board and then further at the town council. Finally, while I appreciate the pointing out of Wake County Public Schools, because of folks who have either been to these meetings or listening online, is a huge concern of mine. While I understand that there are plans in the works, Wake County Public Schools has also submitted documentation about where things are now and where they see things in the future. Hearing from the developer, not the schools, formally on the record as it relates to the particular development that you were presenting before, will not sway and should not sway this board's decision as it relates to that or the public's understanding of where we are. Do not know if you have a child in this school system, but as it relates to schooling, is a huge issue in this community. So again, I ask that you come with a bit more humbleness. Now to address some of the specifics also around the land use map, as I'm going to be very interested to hear what the neighbors have to say. I am that person who has carried the land use map on my phone, the 2030 when I first moved to Apex and the 2045 one since I lived here. So yes, I am probably one of the few people who were very well aware before I ever was appointed to the planning board about how development impacts. And we as planning board members and as citizens in this community need to do a better job in understanding. That is, I hope, our role, the council's role, the staff's role. It is not the developer's role to explain and to continue that conversation and assert what they do and do not do. So I just ask, as you come before us, you have been before us many times and many times before that you will, please take a step back and be a little more humble. The community is here. The community wants to voice their concerns. That's what we want to hear.
Okay, but in all due respect, you appreciate that as the applicant, it's our job to demonstrate the manner in which and the application says it, how we satisfy the town's land use plan. I mean, that is straight out of the zoning petition. I didn't make that up. So if I didn't stand up and make that point, I don't think I'd be doing my job, or any applicant would be doing their job.
Absolutely say that you are meeting the town ordinances. Do not feel like you need to assert that you would be able to do anything different. You would have to meet the town's ordinances.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure thing. Any other questions? All right, thanks.
Yes, we move into the public comment section. Are there any comments?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Richard Colby, Mr. Skinner and Mr. Steele, and all the members of the board. I am representing all the homeowners that are around this property. There are 3 members currently here to support me. Now, I'm going to start off, but then I'm going to turn it over to one of my other members, one of the other members, so we have a nice flow through. Okay, so as I stated, I'm Richard Colby. Let me go to the next one. Oops. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. So, again, I'm speaking in reference to that building development, Pleasant Park, in the house called Sears PUD. I've got Chris Montgomery, Mark Hopkins is here, Rajajan is here. Well, not the last 3 members are working. I know Tom Draper, I know Larry Gull personally, and they're all at work. As a group, we've met, and we are completely opposed to the rezoning of this development. We are all in rural residential, and when we bought into our property, I have 3 acres. We all have at least 3 acres. We were buying into this property because of that reason, because it's rural residential. I like to call it apex residential. And, you know, we enjoy just the atmosphere of having 3 acres, not looking out our backyard yard and looking at, you know, 20 or 30 feet of apartment buildings, or having maybe children running through our yard, not knowing who they are or what the situation may be. We're also going to be talking about the traffic congestion that this development is going to bring. There's 3 other developments that currently are going. We'll get into the specifics a little bit later, but there's 3 other major developments on old US 1 that's going to affect the traffic, not only ours, but the old US 1 within the next year. This one's not even started yet. The other developments are already under construction. Oops. Okay, as you can see, this diagram shows us where I live right there. And we have Mr. Hopkins over here, Montgomery. You can see that we're all real adjacent to this property line. And right here is where my house is. So I'll be looking at whatever they develop out my back window. Oops, keep wanting to do that. There we go. So one of our concerns is privacy in rural residential. We bought into this property because it's a single-family home. I am 68 years young. My wife is 72. I'm happy to retire, and I have been retired for 8 years. I apologize for the overalls, but I haven't worn a suit coat in probably 10 years, so this is what it is. And I get up in the morning, put on my overalls. We understand the need for progress in the Raleigh area, but let's do it right, at the right time, at the right speed. We're just going too fast. And with that, I'd like to turn it over.
Thank you, Mr. Colby.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Hopkins. Thank you very much. for letting us share our concerns. So I want to touch on Richard's point, just sort of show some more details. So to kind of put a point here again on the map, on the eastern side, you can see the Richards property, and the houses were built back away from the Winding Creek Road. So when the houses were constructed, they had privacy in mind. They moved them to the back of the lots because the lots all adjoined the Oscar Sears farm, which had been farmland for a long period of time. Similarly, on the western side of the properties, when we built our houses, which I've put in as red blocks because they weren't shown here, and those are proximate locations, they're not surveyed accurate. We built back from the road. We built back from Holland Road, kind of as far back as we could, backing up to the woods and the farmland, just out of privacy. So we understand that we can't control what happens with the Sears development in the future, and I understand everybody's got to be able to fair use and enjoyment of the property. What we just look at though is, and we shared our concerns with the developers, 20-foot buffer is fairly minimal, and they've got to get a lot of townhouses in here to make the project work. And so we wondered, okay, well, if you couldn't extend the buffers to say 30 feet or more on both sides, and plan in more evergreens as screening, could we at least expand the buffers around the area where our residences are? Could there be some jogs of the townhomes, some modification of the layout so that some privacy and screening could be applied to a greater degree? We didn't hear back from the developer. We did see that they had acknowledged our concerns in the submission to the town. So if this project were to go forward, I would hope that beyond what they're required to do, and I do appreciate your argument that you could do less potentially, but if there could be some adjustments there. Moving on to traffic. So the traffic study was kind of looking at what might happen versus what happened in 2019, or the 2019 traffic. And at that time, a lot's changed. They were showing 9,300 cars per day on Old US 1. Well, since then, New Hill's been developing, and there are people coming down, and it's getting increasingly harder at peak demand to turn left onto Holland to go down US 1. And there's not going to be a traffic light for the foreseeable future because it doesn't line up with Friendship Road, and there are issues with the railroad, and so it sounds like that intersection can't be reworked. So the study considered 3 other projects. There was a townhome community, I think, on Evans and Hume Olive. There was the new town park project and the elementary school. But 3 other large projects that weren't considered in that study was Depot 499, which is, by my estimate, could add about 2,700 additional cars at 1,350 units times 2 cars. And I'll wrap, sorry, 2 seconds. The Towns at Pleasant Park, which is already in flight. In the time we started the presentation, they had 1 building, now they have 3. So that's going to add traffic. And then the development at the end of Holland Road. And so the culmination is that these projects are going to create a lot of traffic flowing onto Holland Road, which will make it very difficult for us to get out, and also for Winding Creek to get on US 1. So thank you very much for your concerns. I would hope that we could maybe just take another look at the traffic study and just consider the bigger picture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren, quick question in regards to the traffic study. What were the findings? All right, Russell, thank you.
So we issued a recommendations letter based on the traffic study that was provided. So in the study, they did look at Hume Olive Road at Old US 1, they looked at Holland Road, and they looked at Friendship Road in addition to the site access. We did not recommend any additional off-site improvements. We do show long delays, which we've seen in other studies on at the traffic signal on Hume Olive and on Holland Road and Friendship Road. There are turn lanes planned for Friendship Road and Holland Road that will help mitigate some of that from other developments, and that is in the future. But this is a little bit shorter build out than some of those other developments. So they studied it without those turn lanes. So it's going to show a little bit worse level service in this study because they didn't assume future turn lanes that are already planned. They did recommend, and we agreed with, turning lanes for the primary side driveways. So you will have a right turn for the right in, right out, which is the site drive 1, which is the westernmost driveway. You'll have a left turn lane on Old US 1 for the easternmost driveway, which is site drive 2. And we recommended 2 lanes outbound from that driveway, which is really a public road. So they have agreed to that. They did recommend, and that was one thing Lauren pointed out, if they are able to obtain property, they'll also put in an exclusive right turn lane for site drive 2, which is the full movement. The problem is that driveway is really close to their property line. And when we looked at it, it's a relatively low volume of turns. Technically meets DOT's warrants for a right turn lane, but since it's such a low volume, we would defer to NCDOT, which they normally say if they're able to get the right of way, then they'd be required to build it. If the adjacent owner is not willing to work with them, then they are not required to do that.
Russell,
Drive 2 is signalized?
It will not be signalized. They studied that, and they do not anticipate it meeting signal warrants in the future, and we concurred with that.
Thank you. Question?
yeah, I'm wondering what some of the other developments that are coming along, where that intersection of this study fits with the other developments that are coming along.
So a traffic impact study is not looking at long-term improvements. It's looking within the build-out horizon for the development. So some of that traffic and some of the improvements associated with that traffic are not included in the study because it's a longer build-out horizon. What we do is we include traffic that, or the applicant includes traffic that is within that build-out horizon for adjacent development. So if we know adjacent development's coming, it's going to contribute a certain amount of traffic in that timeline for this build-out. That traffic will be added, and also the improvements associated with those developments that are already committed would be added as well. So there would be some additional traffic long-term, and that's where you get into like state TIP projects or larger projects to widen, say, a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road. Those are longer-term improvements that typically are not included in a traffic impact analysis unless it's a really, really large development.
So this is a very small snapshot for all.
That's correct. Yeah, it's
Accurate, but small.
That's true. Yeah, in terms of the size of this development, it's a relatively small to medium-sized development for Apex. So when you look at the traffic impacts based on our UDO, their impacts don't trigger any additional off-site improvements outside of the direct access they'll be providing to Old US 1.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Were there any other public comments?
I'd like to speak.
Sir?
I have a handout. May I distribute it?
State your name for the record.
My name is Matthew Christensen. I live at 9206 Wooden Road. Members of the Planning Commission, I'm the division president for Beazer Homes in the Triangle area, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the rezoning, obviously, and specifically Beazer's energy efficiency and the quality in our homes. I've distributed copies of our ESG Summary, which details the environment, social, and governance information relevant to our business. This document is also published on our website. For 7 consecutive years, Beazer has been named the Energy Stars Partner of the Year for Sustained Excellence by the EPA and the U.S. Department of Energy. Detailed on pages 7, 8, and 9 of the handout, every home we build is Energy Star certified. We're the first public builder to ensure that every home we build by the year 2025 will be net zero ready, which will meet the U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready program. Essentially, all Beazer homes will have sufficient energy efficiency to allow it to be powered by solar and have a net zero energy cost. Every home, for every homeowner, regardless of price, will be built to this standard, including in this community. This equates to a HERS score, that's the Home Energy Rating System, of 45. A typical new home is around 73. A typical resale home is around 130. An independent third party tests this in every home today and will continue to do so in the future. Beazer is an industry leader in energy efficiency and committed to building high-quality homes that have lower energy costs. We'd be proud to continue building homes in the town of Apex at this location. Thank you.
Thank you. Was this a new comment or something to rebut on?
Yeah, well, no, there's something I wanted to mention. I mean, there's not a listing of the sewer line in this new property. At one time, I was contacted by Beazer, they're gonna run a sewer line through my property. Under no circumstances did I ever acknowledge that they could do that. No, and I wanna make sure I make it public, that I'm not allowing the sewer lines to go through my property. I don't know where they're gonna put them, but they're not coming through 107, and that's all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Colby. So Lauren, one more question in regards to that. The town is providing water, but it's subject to that lot, correct? These parcels?
Yes, sir.
All right.
They'll be providing, with annexation, we'll be providing those town services.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nate Boquin with Ramey Kemp & Associates. I was the traffic engineer on the project. Just wanted to come up and be here if there's any questions. Also wanted to touch on a couple of the comments that came up already. So on the adjacent developments that we included, that was something that we discussed with the town staff and NCDOT. As Russell mentioned, we look at what's coming in online within our development build out. We do also add in a 4% annual growth rate, so it's compounded every year up to the year that we're analyzing, so the completion of the project. And so that's something else that we take into account just to make it a little bit more conservative. Happy to answer if there's any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Boquin?
I do have a question. Did you work on the Holland Road Assembly PUD? Did you do the TIA for that?
Yes, sir.
I didn't follow the council hearing after we saw that a few months ago, but what was the final recommendation on the offsite improvements for that PUD?
I actually was not in attendance at that hearing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was a fee in lieu for a traffic signal.
It was the signal warrant analysis that was discussed at this board, and in the event that it doesn't warrant, a fee in lieu is being paid to the town to cover it when it does.
Mm.
Any other questions for Mr. Boquin? Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Any other public comments? No? All right, I will close the public comment section and bring it back to the board for further discussion and a possible motion.
I'm assuming the sewer utilities are gonna be going, from the road and not through Mr. Colby's yard, I would assume. Is that correct? The utilities going up down US 1 within the right of way?
That's typically determined at site plan.
Okay.
They would have to determine where the best hookups would be, so
Okay.
as of currently, I'm not aware of the
So should
location.
Mr. Colby be talking to somebody at town council's meeting, or is it even after all that?
I'll let Amanda also answer.
All right, thank you.
So if you'll recall, there was a rezoning similarly where an adjacent property owner said, you're not gonna get a sewer easement through my property. It's ultimately up to the developer to work with the town where the sewer has to come from and where they can get easements from. So the applicant will have to work that out, but when they submit their subdivision plans, where they're gonna get sewer from. I'm not aware of what the other alternate locations may be other than going through, Mr. Colby's property.
Can I answer? I remember that one that you're talking about, and essentially, it empowered the homeowner to make a deal that she finally felt good about.
Yes.
And that it worked out, but the developer had other options that were more expensive, so that all worked out for everybody. But
Yes.
if Mr. Colby really is not gonna ever allow it, is this development, could it be sewered without using his property? Or do we know that?
I'm not able to answer that question, Jason. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, our engineer is not here tonight. He's in Portugal, Mr. Roach. But they have been studying sewer options. My client understands fully where Mr. Colby's position is and respects that position. And so we've been studying all options to make sure that the developer doesn't end up assuming a risk that they don't have an answer to. So there have been a couple of options studied, nothing really finalized, but have gotten a comfort level associated with where things are pointed that continuing to move forward is the right answer right now.
Make sense, Mr. Colby?
Yeah, well, thank you. Can I mention one other thing?
Well, we've closed the public comment section, sir.
Okay.
And this is conversation amongst the board members at this point.
I do have a question for Russell about transportation. So I think the staff report said that the future road section for Old US 1 is a 4-lane median divided. I assume that the applicant will have to dedicate the right-of-way to make that happen at some point in the future, but it says all development frontage improvements along Old US 1 shall be provided based on the minimum 34-foot edge-to-edge roadway, including 2 11-foot lanes and a 6-foot bike lane on a 110-foot right-of-way. I know I've had this conversation with you before, but is that to imply that they're just dedicating right-of-way, or will they be building their half of the future street section along their frontage?
They are not building the ultimate street section across their frontage. That would be considered, oversized infrastructure, and we've had those questions before. If a development was coming in where there might be a need in the immediate future for that, particularly with a large development, there may be a case for providing oversized infrastructure, but for this, it's difficult with the size of the project. They certainly could, I suppose they could volunteer it if they wanted to, but DOT might have a concern with it, we might have a concern with it. I don't know how that matches up with what might be coming in the immediate future. You might just have a lot of pavement sitting out there for 10 or 15 years, not doing anything, which is not necessarily great either.
But the right-of-way won't be built on. It'll be there, it'll be
Correct.
dedicated.
The right-of-way and the thoroughfare buffer will be there.
So we don't have to worry about something having to be moved later.
Except, well, the one difference is when it comes to right-of-way, utilities do have a right to go within the right-of-way per encroachment with DOT. So DOT would typically allow, certain utilities to go in. So in the future, when you wanted to expand the road, you'd have to do a utility relocation at that time. We do, with our plans, with water, things like water and sewer, we do plan for the future and set things back as much as we can, within reason, to avoid those right-of-way impacts in the future, because then we, the town, have to pay for those relocations in the future. But when it comes to private utilities like fiber communication, they might just go in the right-of-way, and in the future, they just have to be moved back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There was a question about, that was also brought up here, about the 50-foot buffer that was not, the request had been received, but there was no sort of further follow-up or whether that was going to be feasible for the development. Can you elaborate on that, as well as I appreciate the understanding sort of where the sewer line is, and I understand that that's still in discussion. Is there some definitiveness that will be had by the time that this goes before town council? So if you answer both of those, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so to answer the buffer question, increasing to the 50-foot buffer significantly reduced the number of units that could be yielded by the development to a point where we wouldn't be able to achieve the overall unit count necessary to support the development, and certainly not be able to justify having the 5 units of affordable housing that are committed as part of the site. So it was the way the site lays out. It's pretty tight, and again, part of that, as I mentioned during my presentation, was by design, to try to create as much, to try to deflate the cost of development as much as possible, increase the number of units as much as possible. That way, you take the supply and demand part of the equation, and you lower the cost of the unit. So ultimately, it just wasn't something we could accommodate. I think with respect to potentially increasing the plantings adjacent to the homes, that was mentioned tonight, I think that's something we could probably work on, and maybe potentially, make that a type A, or augment what would otherwise be required, I don't think that's an unreasonable request, and that's something I can chat about with my client momentarily. With respect to the sewer, we won't have a definitive answer to that by the time we get to council. That's much further down the road, unfortunately. But again, I think that we have alternatives that don't require Mr. Colby, and again, he's been very unequivocating in his position on it, and my client's prepared to move forward now on that.
So thank you for both those answers. So the 50-foot buffer is not feasible for the development. Thank you for clarifying that.
Correct.
But it does sound like there is a space between no extended buffer and 50 foot that you may be able to come up with. Is that, did I understand that correctly?
No, we can't even get to 30. We tried.
You just spoke about plantings.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is potentially going in those buffer areas and increasing the performance standard from a B to something else, supplementing the B standard in an effort to provide for greater opacity earlier in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do we have a possible motion? Additional questions?
Sorry to clarify, and I apologize for jumping in, but to further elaborate on that particular line of conversation, I just confirmed with my client, we would be comfortable with increasing the planting standard adjacent to those homes that were identified on the slide to a type A as opposed to a type B.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will start discussion with, this is always a challenge. This is a challenge for me, and I don't want to speak for my fellow board members, but this is a real challenge. Like I stated before, I have the land use map on my phone. I know when development's coming. I know you all know development is coming, and so it's how do we meet all of the needs? For me, how do I make sure the communities, the neighbors' concerns are being addressed and the community needs are being met? This project, I think, doesn't strike the perfect balance of that, but does strike a bit of a balance in offering homes for more affordable homes for workforce, for the community, which we need, and I'm grateful that we have our affordable housing department that has come online, and it can help facilitate many of those conversations. I am challenged. I hear from the developer that schools may not be an issue. I think the reality is the schools will be an issue. And I'm incredibly concerned and will continue to beat that drum until WCPSS comes in and says that it's not going to be an issue. The reality is traffic is always going to be an issue. It's going to be a lagging indicator, and I wish there was more that we could do about that. I think maybe that's something that the council and the board can look at making some additional adjustments, but it gets complicated because it's not just town, it's NCDOT, it's federal funds. So this is not a perfect balance, but given some of the pros that we're getting, I'm comfortable in voting yes in favor of this proposal, and appreciate the type A buffer. I know it's not the 50-foot buffer, but I appreciate the developer was willing to hear the neighbors' concerns, and also appreciate that there's some additional. There's definitely an understanding about Mr. Colby. You're not wanting the sewer to come through, and
Tina, are you making a motion?
I'm getting there. I promise. I promise. I haven't
thought
had,
you were.
I haven't, I'm continuing my conference call Monday. I've done nothing but talk all day. So I will make a motion to approve this.
Do you want to add a condition?
Sure.
Or was, in fact, well, let me ask the staff. Do we need to add a condition for the type A buffer that he just offered?
I have, would you like me to read it?
Well, my question is in the motion, should we put it in there?
If you
Yes.
let me read it, then you can just say what I said, because it's gonna be difficult.
Good.
Okay, so, we're adjacent to existing residences, and where existing vegetation is not already in place, a 20-foot type A buffer shall be provided. In all other areas, a 20-foot type B buffer shall be provided.
Love it.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
Who's the determining factor on whether or not there's vegetation there?
We make that judgment call.
At
If it's
town
all
knows, okay.
below what we call the base buffer, it's considered not vegetated.
But it's a staff call.
It is.
Okay. So we have a first, do I have a second?
I will second it.
Mark will second. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right. CZ 21CZ 31 passes unanimously. Thank you.
It's been a day.
You're very
Moving on to item number 2, Sarah will discuss rezoning case 22CZ01, the Ardent Summit Pines PUD.
Good evening.
Evening.
Hey.
Evening.
Thank you. I'll be presenting rezoning case 22CZ01, Arden at Summit Pines PUD. The subject site is located here in the general northwestern vicinity, of Apex. Zoom you guys in here to the site. We are looking at this tract here. It's almost 11 3/4 acres. It sits on the north side of Jenks Road, also north of 64. The property is vacant and heavily wooded. The property is currently zoned rural residential, surrounded by other rural residential here to the west and north. Over here we have the the Cary Apex water treatment plant. Down here across the street on the southeast side of Jenks Road, we have Westford. We have the apartments and other future Westford PUD development. The proposed zoning is a planned unit development conditional zoning. The current 2045 land use map recommends designates a subject property as office employment, commercial services. As you'll see, there is a community mixed-use activity center here down at the 64 Jenks Road intersection. The proposed rezoning to planned unit development conditional zoning includes a mix of age-restricted residential uses and commercial uses consistent with the designated office employment, commercial services land uses. Get into those details here shortly. At least 30% of the area to be rezoned is proposed for commercial uses. Therefore, if the property is rezoned as proposed, the 2045 land use map will automatically be amended to high-density residential, office employment, commercial services per 160D. The applicant conducted a neighborhood meeting on November 17th, 2021. The neighborhood meeting is attached in your report. A letter of impact from Wake County Public School System was not requested for this rezoning due to the proposed age restriction. So that'll take us right now into that. So the permitted uses that have been proposed. So as you'll see here, this is the site. As I said, it's about 11 3/4. So this section here, directly off of Jenks Road here for the most part, this is the non-residential or commercial area. We have Lowell Road over here. Bless you. So this will also include an extension of Lowell Road into the site and then stub over here to the west. So access to the commercial area will be provided internally here, as well as then internal substreet to the residential portion, which is going to be this back portion here. And there is a right-in, right-out movement here on Jenks Road, this being then the only full movement access. So with these proposed uses, back here in the residential tract is a congregate living facility. How that is defined down there is also fully included in your staff report. Multifamily or apartment, which is age restricted. Age restricted as 100% of all occupied units shall have as a resident at least one person age 55 or older. And then for our commercial tract, the proposed uses include a neighborhood commercial uses such as restaurants, medical, dental, office, convenience stores, gas sales, grocery, general and specialty, health or fitness, kennel, veterinary clinic, those type of uses. Again, your neighborhood commercial uses. That full listing is included in your staff report. The PUD proposes an overall maximum residential density of 160 dwelling units with a minimum of just over 3.5 acres of commercial area. Residential building height max is 60 feet or 5 stories, and 5 stories, excuse me. Non-residential building height max is 50 feet. The full list of setbacks, that table is in your staff report, all very typical for what we would expect to see. Moving on to buffers. This portion here along to the north, we have a 20-foot type A buffer, which exceeds width and or opacity for what would be required. In almost all instances, they are exceeding either in opacity or width, with the one exception being here just a 20-foot type A. So it's increased in opacity but decreased in width. That full table is in your staff report. But like I said, we're seeing either typical or increased buffers. The development shall include a minimum of 25% RCA. There is a parking zoning condition, and that is because of the residential product being age restricted, therefore not having the same parking demands. Development in the residential district here shall include a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1.5 off-street motor vehicle parking spaces per dwelling unit. Development in the residential district shall include a minimum of 6 bicycle parking spaces. There is a full listing of architectural standards included in your staff report. Before I go that, I'll just go ahead and talk about the phasing plan real quick, and that will be to make sorry.
One question, Sarah.
Sure.
The parking, there were no EV parking, but they had bicycle parking?
It was EV parking as required. So essentially what I presented what was different from the UDO requirement.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So for the phasing, it would be obviously to extend here. Phase 1 would be to include that extension of low rolled or frontage improvements. I'll get into those here shortly. And then also this right in, right out access into here. So that would be phase 1 would include the residential area and access to that. Utility plan, this PUD does propose to extend utilities to future development. Now for the residential elevation so that they'll follow along with your staff report as to where we are. So here are some illustrative residential elevations. The full listing of conditions are included in your staff report, both for residential and non-residential. And there are the proposed or illustrative non-residential elevations. There is an affordable housing condition proposed. The full language is included in your staff report. I'll do my best to summarize. And that is a minimum of 6 of the residential units, either congregate living facility units as modified herein, or age-restricted 55 and older multifamily apartment units. multifamily/apartment units constructed within the development shall be designated as low-income restricted units. The bedroom mix of affordable units shall include 4 one-bedroom units and 2 two-bedroom units. The affordable units shall be made for rental such that the maximum rent limits per bedroom size and household income limits shall be no greater than 60% of the AMI. And the affordable units shall be restricted for an affordability period of 5 years, starting from the date of issuance of the first residential certificate of occupancy. And again, the full listing is in your staff report. We talked a little bit about the transportation plan and access. The plan is consistent with our Apex transportation plan, and that does include the minimum 110-foot right-of-way here. So any additional right-of-way that would need to be dedicated would be provided here. There would be a 10-foot side path along Jenks Road here, consistent with our bike ped systems map plan, as well as 5-foot sidewalk on all internal streets, on both sides of all internal streets. A TIA was also performed as part of this PUD, and the recommendations are consistent both with the town and DOT, and that full listing for turn lanes and approaches is included in your staff report. The applicant met with the Environmental Advisory Board on November 18th, 2021. The full listing of zoning conditions suggested by the EAB are included in your report. The applicant is providing almost all of those recommended zoning conditions. Some are noted to be applicable to the residential district only, and those are noted in your staff report. The applicant went before the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Advisory Commission February 23rd, 2022, and fee in lieu was recommended. Those details also in your staff report. The 2045 land use map designates this site as office employment, commercial services. The proposed rezoning with the mix of age-restricted residential uses and the non-residential uses being at least 30%, or consistent with the office employment commercial services land use designation. Therefore, if the property is rezoned as proposed, the 2045 land use map would automatically be amended to high-density residential office employment commercial services. The proposed rezoning is reasonable and in the public interest because the rezoning will allow the project to be developed with age-restricted residential uses accompanied by non-residential development along the thoroughfare frontage, which complements the land use at Westford across Jenks Road. Additionally, the PUD requires that the residential be age-restricted housing with a minimum of 6 affordable units. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Sarah, any questions for Sarah? The applicant want to speak?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker Poe Adams and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. We'll get my presentation up in a minute, but Sarah already did a very thorough explanation of this PUD and a lot of the commitments that go with it. But the property is 8200 Jenks Road. We're just north of the intersection of Jenks Road and 64. As I'll get into in a moment, there's a lot of transportation improvements that go along with that, but think make a right off of 64 into Jenks and we're just ahead on the left. Site's 11.8 acres. We're in the ETJ, and so there's a concurrent annexation petition that has been submitted with this request. Thank you. So as Ms. Van Every mentioned, We are designated on the future land use map as office employment and commercial services, though we're directly across the street from that mixed-use center. We're proposing a modification to the future land use map to add this senior living portion of our project, but we are also providing a meaningful mixed-use commitment and a meaningful amount of office employment and commercial services oriented along the property's Jinx Road frontage in furtherance of the existing designation. This map shows the existing zoning, so we're zoned rural residential, but we're directly across from the Westford PUD, and so that kind of guides a lot of the development patterns in the area, and it has a similar mix of residential and non-residential uses, and so we use that as a guide to come up with an appropriate mix. We're also offering a distinct residential type that adds to a greater variety of residential options in that area. So we're proposing to develop, to rezone to a PUD CZ, and there's 2 districts, as Ms. Van Every mentioned, and so this slide shows with color where those are. So that residential district is at the rear of the site. It's a modified congregate care use, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a moment, but that's kind of critical to what we're trying to achieve with this project. At a minimum, there's a 55-plus age restriction for all the residential units. That commercial district has a number of permitted office and research and retail sales and services uses, all discussed with staff and worked with to come up with the right mix and the right options for that site. So getting into the residential district itself, as I said, it's a modified congregate care restricted to 55 plus. Now the actual building parameters, 5-story maximum with slope on the site. It's generally going to be about 4 stories with 5 stories where there's a low point on the site. Max of 160 units. So that proposed congregate care use, the modification, that's one of the key reasons why we had to do a PUD here, is to define exactly what we're going to do. And so we have a modified congregate care definition in the PUD itself. And the best way to explain that modification is if you take a continuum and you have just a basic age-restricted senior apartment community on one end of the continuum. On the other end, you have congregate care. So the full congregate care use would be folks sign up as tenants and they have a list of services that are a part of that care. So you have your medical services, your food services, whether it's a salon or other personal services, are all in that rent no matter what. Now we are in the middle of that continuum and we achieve that in a number of ways. So we have the physical attributes of a congregate care facility. We have interior corridors and elevators. We have controlled access, so it looks and feels just like a congregate care facility. But where we differ is how we provide the services that would be included with congregate care. So it's an a la carte model. And so you don't have to sign up for everything at once. You only sign up for the services that you need. It's done through third-party providers that Arden has as partners with its developments. So you only get the services that you need, and you're better able to control your monthly expenses by not having everything all at once. And as you age in place, you can add services or remove services as needed. So that's the goal. And what that achieves is providing housing for a specific demographic that Arden targets, and that's middle-income seniors. And so middle-income seniors are folks that earn too much to be eligible for Medicare, but not enough to live in the Class A high-end senior living or to pay for congregate care outright. So they're kind of on the lower end of the affordability spectrum, but above some of those income thresholds that would allow for other affordable options. And so this slide just shows some of the demographics we're trying to meet with this product, and sample folks are teachers, law enforcement, and nurses. They again just earn a little bit too much, but are priced out of some of those other senior housing products. It's a large growing demographic, and so we try to provide housing for them. But not to be lost in all of that is we're also providing true affordable housing with this project. And so we've got 2 excerpts from Apex's affordable housing plan here. The intent there is just to show not only that there's a recognized need for affordable housing, but also specific to seniors. And so what we're providing is 6 affordable units. The breakdown is 4 1-bedroom, 2 2-bedroom, 60% AMI limit. We worked with the town's affordable housing coordinator to come up with all the requirements and the terms. Actually bumped it down to 60% recently because new AMI went up so much that it changed the rates. So we're trying to target a specific demographic within Apex, and then that term is 5 years. commercial district at the front of the property, oriented along Jinks Road to get best visibility. A wide range of more neighborhood-friendly commercial uses are proposed. We work with staff to develop those. From the standpoint of the senior housing complex, ideally we have something that's usable for those folks, and so thought would be whether it's medical providers or restaurants or something that folks could walk to in close proximity that complements that senior community at the rear of the site. Other goals accomplished with this, there's some substantial transportation improvements contemplated for this area, and so a lot of the initiation of that is achieved with this project. So the image on the upper left is from the town's transportation plan, and that shows a future proposed realignment of Jinks Road. So we're doing a couple of things. We're building out the full 4-lane divided section as part of this project, but we're also dedicating that additional right-of-way to accommodate the future realignment if and when that occurs. So that's kind of the bottom or the southwest corner of the site. There's a little extra right-of-way to accommodate that bend. What we're also providing, if you see the DOT interchange plans, is if and when 64 becomes a controlled access highway, how do you provide access to all the folks that are north of 64 and west of our site? And so there's a future collector street that's envisioned, and we are initiating that with this project, and it will be built out in that phase 1, and it'll stub to the western boundary of our site. Provided environmental commitments, minimum 25% RCA. The other ones that were provided that are summarized in the staff report are shown on this slide. Now, one I wanted to comment on, there's a recommendation or a request to have pervious pavers as a matter of safety with senior residents. We didn't think that was appropriate for our community. A number of standards that the planning board and the council will look at when evaluating not only a conditional zoning, but also a PUD, a whole list of things summarized in the staff report, summarized in our application. I could go through them in detail, but we believe that we've provided all the necessary information in this PUD to check all of those boxes, and we've provided all the conditions to be consistent with the surrounding area, to be consistent with the neighborhood, and to be consistent with the development patterns that are started with that Westford PUD and will be advancing along that collector street that we're starting here. This slide is just to show that we filed back in January. I'm sure the board's well familiar with the process and the steps that it takes, but this has gone through 5 rounds of review, and we've worked extensively with staff to get this right. And so that's all I have. We've got a number of members of our team to answer any questions, but we appreciate the board's consideration and respectfully request that you vote to recommend approval of this PUD. Thank you.
Mr. Marsh, any questions?
I have a quick question. Can you go back to the DOT slide? And this is probably more of a Russell question. We just heard a case last time about right-of-way reservation on the Sweetwater side of the Richardson Road and Highway 64. That looks like a different version than what was presented there. Has there been any discussions from DOT about a converging diamond versus what looks like a semi-clover leaf? I'm just curious. I'm wondering, this intersection, I live up on this side of town and there's a lot of traffic, and I'm just curious, like, is the applicant here making a move to go one way and others are going a different way?
Yeah, what Sweetwater looked at was collapsing that south side, tightening up the interchange and getting rid of that loop for a compact diamond. Doesn't really affect the north side. So what's being shown here is acceptable with regard to this development. So does that answer the question, or?
Yeah.
Because they're basically showing the old US 64 interchange, which was before Sweetwater came in with the revision, but it doesn't really change the north side.
So we could have one set of exit on ramps on the north versus on the south.
Yeah, it essentially gets rid of that loop on the south side and tightens up that footprint on the south side with what their plan was proposed to do. But I mean, there is no official final design for NCDOT's interchange yet, since it's not funded. So we're still going based on assumptions with anything we propose.
Part B of this question, similar to the last case we just heard, the frontage improvements here, they would be dedicating their half of the 110 foot. Would they have to build their half of a 4-lane street section here?
Yeah, they're setting up their ultimate section. And if you look at how it was laid out, that slide with the lanes that were shown on the north end of the site, it's actually mirroring what's across the road at Westford today with their additional lanes. So they're being able to use that left through and right southbound, approaching their full movement intersection, and then it tapers back in. So there will be a striped out area of pavement that's not used currently. We do know from previous traffic analysis working with Westford and Sweetwater is that at some point we're going to need dual turn lanes entering and exiting Jinks Road down at US 64. So for what is proposed by Sweetwater now, they'll actually build out that super street with dual turn lanes. But eastbound, because you don't have two through lanes all the way up, there is a gap there with the gas station on the corner. They will shadow out that left turn lane. And we anticipate at some point in the near future, we'll have to do the dual right turn lanes will be proposed down there. So you'll have a need for a full 4-lane section through there in the relative near future.
So in this case, where you had Westford that came in and built their half of a 4-lane median for basically their whole frontage that goes all the way over to the townhomes and past. And now you get these guys on the other side coming in, you have a full 4-lane section road through there.
Correct, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and it does in some points. I mean, there are certainly pinch points, especially on the north end of the site, where it's just it goes off site and you can't, provide that full width there. But in the future with development, there'd be opportunities to build that out. So
cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
I believe we're at the public comment section. Do we have any public comment? No? All right, then I will close the public comment section. And bring it back to the board for further discussion.
I'll take a stab at going first on this one, because this is my neck of the woods up here. I think the use being proposed here is something we really need in Apex. I don't think we've seen, I think there was one off Highway 55 a year or two ago. I don't remember how that, it was kind of mixed between whether we wanted or didn't, but I think in this part of the town, given what has said, the aesthetics of the building, what's going on across the street with pretty high density residential, rental, high density, multifamily, garden style, we have a deck wrap that's just proposed. There's commercial. I'm hoping that this will help with the commercial. I know the commercial doesn't come on the front end, it's after the rooftop. So hopefully we get more residential bases to justify the commercial, so we don't have to drive, to the other side of the road to get to the commercial that's coming in with the Sweetwater folks. But I think it's good. You're going to get most of a 4-lane section. It's needed. Going back to the previous case where the gentleman, Mr. Colby said, think big picture. I mean, I think this is, when we get little segments of road that are built to the full section, I know, Russell, you had a good point. We don't want to build pavement that's not going to get used. But on the flip side, if you build it now, then we don't have to build it in the future. And every other jurisdiction other than Apex and Durham, they do this. They build your half of the full section, and then over time you get a full road. And I think the big picture here is we need these 4-lane roads to carry the cars until, the cars are carrying us without drivers and things, which probably isn't happening too far off. But I think this is a great use, and I'm supportive of it.
So if I hear you right, Ryan, you're making a motion?
I will for sure make a motion.
All right.
I'll second.
And we have Tina seconding. Thank you.
Before we vote, I just want to say, I have a parent who actually would be perfect to go right there. So I think we need more of this.
It's close by. I mean,
Yeah, it's very close.
I agree.
And we're sorely lacking. Yes. Yeah.
An affordable rental, that's interesting. You don't hear that very often.
No.
You do not.
I mean, that's kind of slick.
I will +1 that.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Yes, we're going to go ahead and take our vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposing? All right, so 22CZ01 passes unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to new business. Amanda, going to do some UDO discussions?
Yep. More in front of you. Okay, so we have a few amendments, and this first one is actually related to a fairly recent amendment from a couple of months ago where the Planning Committee of Town Council asked us to amend the ordinance to require that a neighborhood meeting be held anytime a school, public or private use was proposed, whether it was a minor or a major site plan. That passed, and when the planning board made their recommendation, there was the request for town council to consider adding additional uses for that neighborhood meeting requirement with minor site plans. And so town staff, planning staff met with the planning committee of town council again to discuss that concern. And that what is in this UDO amendment here is what resulted from that planning committee meeting. So the proposal is to change the name of the neighborhood meeting section to neighborhood notice, require applicants of minor site plans for various high-intensity land uses to hold a neighborhood meeting prior to the submittal of the application. I'll get into those. It's a handful of uses. Require applicants of minor site plans for non-high-intensity land uses located on land that has not had a rezoning in the last 2 years and that is located within 300 feet of a residential land use to send a letter explaining the project and providing their contact information to property owners within that 300-foot notification area. And then move the changes that we just made for school, public, private into this section so that all of these uses are together. So I'll show you what this looks like. This is essentially all the verbiage for what I just summarized. So the uses that would, so for the non-intense land uses, they would send a letter, and we got some feedback from members of the development community, and this is what Raleigh does for a lot of their application types. They require that notification letter to go out with all the same contact information that applicants provide in the neighborhood meeting invitation packet. So that way the adjacent property owners know how to contact the applicant and appropriate staff members should there be a concern with the proposed development. And that letter must be sent at least 14 days prior to the submittal of the minor site plan. So it gets the adjacent property owners, gives them notice at the very beginning of the process. And so the uses that would require neighborhood meeting, if they're a minor site plan, would be daycare facility, government service, school, public or private, which you know is already in the UDO, restaurant drive-through, and convenience store with gas sales. And these were the uses that the planning committee felt you typically have, that concerns are expressed about from adjacent property owners when they are in close proximity to residential land uses. And for the most part, the issues that are driving the concerns here are traffic and noise. And so they would follow the same neighborhood meeting procedures as all other application types that require neighborhood meeting. The meeting must be held 14 days prior to submittal of the residents receive notice 14 days prior to the neighborhood meeting, which is held prior to the application submittal. And then we're updating our charts to indicate all these, to reference all these changes and various other, subsequent changes to numbering because of the proposed changes. Any questions on this amendment?
I have some questions.
Okay.
I may have been giddy when I saw this. For the notification letter, I wonder if we can include, or if it does include, information on how to, so it has information on how to reach out to the developer. Does it have information on the process of a minor site approval so that if someone has a concern that falls outside of these uses, that they know who to contact and what that process is and what the timing of that is? I do realize that all of that is public information, that is accessible on the website. But I wonder if there's a letter being sent out, I think including that information,
Sure.
or at least directing to that would be helpful.
So, assuming this gets approved, my next task is to create this packet so that it's a standardized packet of information that's going to go out. And in the neighborhood meeting notification letter that currently goes out, there's information about the various departments. If you have issues when it comes time for construction, assuming it's approved, here's who you contact if it's a concern about, and there's various topics. And there is a little summary about process. This will be heard by the planning board and town council. This is how you can provide comment. So we'll have to come up with some basic wording on what the process is for minor site plans.
Okay, wonderful. And then I know I actually had specifically asked for additional uses, just not knowing. So I appreciate that these were uses that the staff and council felt like were the most common. I am wondering, I'm a little fearful that there may be uses that are not listed that that may arise, that would fall on a minor site plan, that citizens may want to comment on, and may, I think, require a neighborhood meeting, and I'm trying to figure out how to address that.
That's something that the staff and the planning committee spent a good amount of time talking about. It's very difficult to determine what's going to be a concern to a neighbor. It's very subjective in a lot of ways, and so what we based, what we finally settled on this list was what, in our experience, we've commonly heard complaints about. And as we continue on with development, and if there's something that's common and showing itself to be a concern over and over again, then certainly this can always be reevaluated in the future.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this amendment? Okay. The next ones are easier. This next amendment is based upon a fairly recent change to state law, which prohibits a local ordinance from requiring masonry curtain walls or masonry skirting for manufactured homes. And so we are proposing to, in the supplemental standard, strike the requirement for continuous masonry wall and indicate that just opaque or semi-opaque skirting material shall be installed. So it's up to the owner what kind of material to use. Any questions there? Okay. The next amendment is to the daycare use as applicable in the light industrial zoning district. And this is to basically become more flexible with how the daycare facility is allowed, and also recognize that the way the UDO these standards were set up was thinking about a daycare located inside of a use in an LI zoned area, with that building being a single use. But what we're finding more and more of are multi-tenant buildings in an LI area that, for all intents and purposes, may be the similar use as with one building, but the way the standards are written would make it difficult for a daycare serving employees of those uses to be served. So the proposal is to strike the first standard, that it be used solely by the employees of the use where the daycare is located. Also, the daycare facility, just clarifying that it shall not exceed 20% of the gross square footage of the building in which it's located, not the use in which it's located. So the intent is still being kept the same, that you're not going to have a standalone daycare in an LI zoned area. And then proposing to strike the standard that it shall not have any advertising or signage, considering it's serving only people within the building where it's located. They may or may not need advertising, but just giving that flexibility anyhow. And also adding a standard that the daycare facility shall be located at least 1,320 feet, which is a quarter mile, from any gas and fuel wholesale use. So these are like where there's large quantities and large storage tanks of fuel, so it's a hazardous use that's identified. And this radius is recommended by the Wake County Emergency Management. Any questions on this use?
So gas and fuel wholesale would not be like a gas station?
Would not be a gas station, that's correct. It's, and you're going to see the definition in the next amendment, but it's like over 2,500 gallons of combustible or flammable liquid, and over 2,000 liquid gallon equivalent of a gas.
It's like there's a big one, William Street south of the one.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and it's not intended for retail either. So,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. And then, so that leads us to our next amendment, which is to the gas and fuel wholesale use, to add some supplemental standards. So in the use chart, we're just adding the reference to the supplemental standards section. And the proposal is to refine the definition and to add the separation requirement that you just saw from the uses daycare facility, school, public or private, hospital, and nursing or convalescent facility. And basically, these are uses that are difficult to evacuate in the event of an emergency. So for the definition, we're adding the words "or combustible" to the definition, because that's equally as important as flammable. Different liquids some are flammable, some are combustible. And then for supplemental standard, adding that 1,320-foot separation standard from the uses that I listed. Any questions there? And you can see in the definition, it's for the bulk storage and wholesale distribution of fuel, not for retail sales. Okay. And the next amendment is to the dimensional standards for detached accessory structures in order to allow those structures to be no more than 5 feet taller than the principal building or structure. Currently, an accessory structure cannot be taller than the principal building, but we're finding the need to support the development of accessory dwelling units, that the additional height is becoming something that is needed. You often see sometimes a one-story house, even if it has a pitched roof, but in order to support that accessory dwelling unit above the garage, for example, they're needing just a bit more height. And so we feel comfortable with the additional 5 feet of height.
I got an ancillary question to this that doesn't have to do with the amendment, but I remember, Diane, you presented to, it might have been the TCC a few years ago when we were strong about the ADU that was going on in Durham at the time. Apex didn't really have any ADUs that were being proposed. Are we getting more proposals at a good rate?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
That was a key part of the affordable housing work group.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because it creates like micro infill.
Oh, yeah. Very well aware. It's just at the time, like 5 years ago, Apex didn't really have any, but it's good to
Yeah, I
hear
think
that.
the market is getting to where
Right.
it's making sense. You know, people realize they can invest, build it, and then have a source of income to help support their mortgage.
Are you seeing any new construction with ADUs built in, or is it still more down, like in the downtown area?
So planning staff does not review single-family and two-family building permits, except in the small-town character area. And so I do know for certain that in the small-town character area, we're seeing this either with renovations to existing houses or even with new construction, the addition of ADUs at the time of both renovations and new construction. The frequency of how it may be occurring outside of the small-town character area, I can't speak directly to that. And our final amendment tonight is to the required improvements exemption section to clarify which driveway-related improvements are not exempt from public road improvements. And this is basically a clarification of the intent of this section. So if it's a small development under a certain threshold size, the standard provides some exemptions from road improvements, but it says this exemption does not exempt installation of a paved driveway apron, but it should involve not exempting the required driveway apron, necessary driveway relocation, and other roadway markings and signage associated with the driveway location, and that's to facilitate safety.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on that one? No. And planning staff is recommending approval.
We have a possible motion.
I will make a motion that we accept all of the UDO amendments.
Mark
Second.
a motion and Tina's a second. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The UDO amendments pass unanimously. I have one more motion I need. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. I have a motion and a second from Mr. Royal and Mr. Braswell. Thank you all. Adjourned.